Hey everybody, and welcome back to what is amazingly the final installment of Professor Pastor Paul's Midweek Bible Festival. We started back in, April or May of 2020 doing this, right after COVID began. Here we are over 2 years later. I've enjoyed it. I've missed meeting with you on Wednesday nights, but we're here on the fourth and final episode on the book of Job. So welcome back to the book of Job, episode 4. We're going to be covering tonight the final chapters 38 to 42 of Job. There's a lot there. That's 5 chapters. That's a whole lot of stuff. But before we hit those chapters, I want to do a quick sort of survey of where we've been and what's happened. Okay. Number one, we had this good guy Job back in chapter 1. Very good. Absolutely righteous. What were the phrases that were used? Let's see, back in my notes here. The phrases that are used: blameless, upright, fears God, turns away from evil. Job's a good guy. Okay. The greatest of the men of the East. Actually, it says the greatest of the people of the East. And so, we then, once we're introduced to Job, we cut to the heavenly realm where God, the Lord, is holding court with the sons of God, sort of his staff team, right? And he makes this bet with this particular member of his staff, member in good standing, known as Hasatan, the accuser. Also can be translated as the one who opposes, Hasatan. And Hasatan says, well, God, the only reason that Job is so good is because he's playing the system. It's because you give him all this good stuff, because he's got all this money, he's got good health, he's got a large family, he's got a high social position, he's got the dream, he's living the dream. And Hasatan, the accuser, the one who is opposed, says to God, this is only happening because he's playing the system. If you stop giving him all the stuff that's so good, he will turn against you and he will no longer be righteous. God says, not so. And so there's this bet. It's basically a bet. God says, Job will not fold. Job will not curse me, says God. The accuser says, oh yes, he will. Let's find out. Let's run the experiment and see how Job responds. Now, obviously at that point, and I said this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important. Basically, when we get to that little bit of dialogue up there in the introductory chapters of Job, we ask ourselves, why would God do that? Why would God lay a bet with this accuser fellow at the expense of Job? Why? And you expect at that point that the rest of the book is going to answer that question. Right? But I'll tell you now, spoiler, it doesn't answer that question. It never really answers the question, why did God lay that bet? So, if you want to know why God did that, sorry to say, I don't have an answer for you. And frankly, neither does anybody. Okay. Now, the assumption here behind all this story, Job's assumption, is that if you do good, you get good. And that's what Hasatan, the accuser, was saying to God. The reason why he's so good is because you're rewarding him. The systems of rewards and punishments, he's figured out how to play the game. And so this assumption that if you do good, you get good permeates everything, including the mind of Hasatan, the accuser. Okay? The assumption, if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. This is the assumption not only behind the book of Job, but behind virtually the entire story of ancient Israel with the prophets, reminding them to straighten up and God will bless you. The prophets telling the people the reason why things are bad is because you're not attending to the covenant. You got to do good to get good, right? So that's the assumption. If A, then A. Don't forget that. We've said it every video this month, and I'm going to say it again. If A, then A. That is, after all, let me sort of pause here for a second before we move on. If A, then A, that is, that's justice, folks. That's justice, right? If A, then A. If you do good, you get good. That's basically what we might call justice, right? That's the foundation of our whole justice system. If you break the law, you get punished. You do bad, you get bad. You do good, you don't get arrested, right? So this if A, then A sounds simplistic, but we all believe it, and we all live according to it. Then and now. So basically, Job's life is destroyed, except for his life narrowly defined as his physical life. He loses his children, he loses his health, he loses his wealth, he loses his social status, and he finds himself on the outskirts of society, on the ash heap outside the city. Okay. Mocked, by the way, by all the poor people that he used to, serve. So, his three friends come around. Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar come around, and they hang out for a while in silence for a week, mourning Job's colossal losses. And they're silent, which is recommended when somebody's mourning. When somebody's grieving, silence often is the best thing to do, is the best way to go. It's wisdom to be silent around somebody who's grieving. And they are silent for a while. But as soon as Job opens his mouth in chapter 3, an argument begins. And behind this argument is the idea of justice, if A, then A, that has formed all four of these characters their whole lives. They have prospered from it. They've all been good, and they've all been rewarded for it. So if A, then A has made them who they are. And so they come to this discussion with that assumption. That's the big assumption. If A, then A, justice. Okay. So Job says, I'm innocent. Right. So, and I am suffering. So it must be either that God is not just, or God does not operate the universe according to the strict principle of justice. Right, those are two of our big questions. Is God just? And if so, does God operate the universe according to the strict principle of justice? And if so, how can we explain Job's suffering? Those are the big questions. I meant to put them up earlier, but I'll say them again. Is God just? If so, does God operate the universe according to the strict principle of justice? And if so, how can we explain Job's suffering? Job responds to those questions by saying, I'm innocent. Therefore, either God is unjust, or God at least does not operate the universe according to the strict principle of justice. This assumption, if A, then A, is being challenged. His friends hold to the same basic idea of justice, if A, then A, but they turn it around and they say, no, God is just, and God does operate the universe according to the strict principle of justice. Therefore, they blame not God as Job does, but they blame Job and say, Job, you have done something wrong. You have sinned. In fact, in chapter 22, they start making up a whole list of sins that Job must have committed in order to be punished this way. Okay? So at issue here is their assumption. Is if A, then A. Is that true? Does God operate the universe according to that kind of justice? And if so, why is Job suffering? His friends say Job's guilty and that God is not to blame. Job, on the other hand, blames God, saying he's innocent. And of course, Job is right. Remember that. Job is right. But he doesn't know that he's right. He knows it, but they are ignorant of what happened. They don't know. Neither Job nor the three friends know what happened earlier up in heaven with the accuser fellow. So that's what's going on. They argue for 35 plus chapters. They argue back and forth about this. Who's right, who's wrong, blah, 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 blah. And boy, does it get intense. It gets really intense. They call each other names. There's sarcasm flying back and forth. Job is terrifically hotly angry, not only at his friends, but at God. It gets pretty rough. Finally, Job has had enough of the hot air from his friends. Had enough. Miserable comforters you are, he says to them. Miserable. And being done with his friends, Job calls directly on God, saying, look, God, I am a judge, and I know what justice looks like. I know I'm not getting any. Why can't you be as nice as me and at least explain to me why I'm not getting any justice here? Why can't you explain what's going on? Why can't you help me out here in the way that I've helped out so many people in my life as a judge? And, so he says, God, please show up. Fist to the sky, God, show up. And in chapter 38, God does. God makes a personal visit to our hero. And God shows up in a whirlwind, a storm, a great storm. And God's first question is, who are you, Job? This kind of tough guy talk. Were you around, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Were you around? Do you know anything about how I arranged the stars in the sky? Basically like this. That's sort of the approach. What God really is doing here is taking Job on a virtual tour of the cosmos. God shows Job the earth and the sea, the so-called fountains of the deep, the pillars of the earth, and the sky. Takes Job on a ride through the sky. It talks about the Pleiades, the Great Bear, Orion. Okay, so God answers Job's questions for justice. Job's pleas for justice are answered not in terms of some explanation, but in terms of a cosmic vision. Totally not expected. Of course, totally not expected. So first, this rapid tour of the large-scale structure of the universe as they understood it 600 BC. We have the earth, we have the sea, we have the sky, the firmament, it was called. And so God takes Job on a super high velocity tour of the large scale universe. But then God takes the foot off the pedal a little bit, touches the brakes a little bit, and begins to slow down. At this point, God asks Job, who at this point is probably a little bit confused as to why God is answering this way. God brings up a new topic. God brings up mountain goats. Have you seen the mountain goat feed? How do you know how the mountain, do you know? Check it out. Look at the mountain goat. Now that's another weird response to the question of justice. The highest of human ideals, justice, answered in terms of the most basic, most pedestrian animal. The goat is God's answer to Job's pleas for justice. The mountain goat. The deer. So we're talking about individual animals at this point. Who else? The wild ass, the wild ox. God points to the wild ass and says, look, this creature is completely wild. This creature has nothing to do with you, Job. Has nothing to do with human civilization. In fact, the wild ass mocks human civilization. It laughs at it. The wild ox is way too proud to work for any human master. These animals that God points out to Job are noteworthy and even lovable in themselves, not because they serve human beings. And Job is seeing them as if for the first time. Look, says God, look at the world around you. Look at the cosmos around you, Job. Open your eyes and look at the mountain goat, the deer, the wild ass, the wild ox, and the ostrich, a most laughable creature, tries to fly but cannot. Utter failure. Look at this creature that God loves. It is clear throughout these speeches of God in chapters 38, 39, and 41 for that matter, that God is in love with creation, with the mountain goat, with the wild ass, with the deer, with the wild ox. God knows them, God watches them, God attends to them, God loves them. God loves creatures other than human beings. God loves and attends to creatures other than Job. What Job is getting here is a rearrangement in his perspective. Whereas before, human civilization, and most particularly him and his town and his land, were all he was concerned about. But now, he's looking at the world from a perspective in which human civilization is marginal, is unimportant, and if it's noticed at all, it's laughed at. Job is getting a truly cosmic perspective. The wild horse, the hawk, and finally in this particular section, God points out the vulture to Job and says, look at the vulture. Look at this beautiful creature. Now, beautiful is not a word that you and I might pick to describe a vulture. A vulture, a creature that lives on death, God says, and feeds blood to its young. But God loves this crazy bird. This crazy bird that lives at the most remote extremes of Job's world. These are all creatures Job has never considered, and now he's seeing them. They are bright, they are clear. He's seeing them like God sees them. And he's astonished. Finally, God shows Job two additional creatures. One of land, one of sea. He shows Job Behemoth, a creature of the land that is so frightening, not even God can approach it without a sword. Even God is afraid of this creature. This creature would snap Job in two and not even think about it. It's a terrifically fearsome creature. Some people have said, oh, it must be hippopotamus. This must be a description of hippopotamus or some other creature that we all know. But no, this is a mythological creature, but Job is actually getting a vision of it. And it represents sort of the, behemoth represents the, shall we say, chaotic and maybe frightening and unsafe aspects of creation, of which there are many, of course. But these mythological creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan, represent cosmic chaos. The things that frighten us, the things that are unsafe. The world is unsafe. Back in Genesis, it said the world was made good. It didn't say the world was made safe. So God shows Job these two fearsome creatures, and the encounter with Leviathan is especially frightening for Job. It's up close and personal to this enormous sea creature that represents primordial chaos and danger in the universe. But the point here is that yes, there is danger. There is Behemoth. There is Leviathan. But God does not call them bad. God does not try to overcome these animals or destroy these animals. God points them out to Job and says, look at them. Look at these creatures who I have made, the firstborn of creation. When he looks at Behemoth, he says, Job, I made Behemoth before I made you. Behemoth is fundamental. The danger in the world, the unsafeness of the world preceded you, Job. And it is not bad. I love it. God is proud of it. All of this tour of the sky and the sea and the earth, these individual creatures, the mountain goat, the deer, the wild ass, the wild ox, the wild horse, the ostrich, the hawk, the vulture, and then Behemoth and Leviathan. This is God's answer to Job. And by the way, this is the longest divine monologue in the whole Bible. Nowhere in the Bible does God speak more words in a row than at the end of Job, chapters 38 to 41. It's all God, except for one little section. And the crazy thing here is that it works. It humbles Job. Job wanted justice. Job wanted an explanation. I can imagine Job wanting God to come down and to diagram exactly why and lay out in plain language exactly why Job suffered. But God doesn't do that. God says, in effect, Job, there's a lot more going on in this universe than you. There's a lot more, and I have my eye on all of it. Complexities you could never understand. And Job is Job is humbled by it. Job is completely humbled by it. Okay. So what's happening here is this. There's this assumption about justice. If A, then A. And so far I've said that's the basic assumption that Job and his friends carry. If A, then A. If I do good, I'll get good. God will reward me if I do good. If I do badly, God will punish me. This whole system of rewards and punishments, this whole justice thing, this whole if A, then A, that has been their assumption. But hear me now. We see now an even deeper assumption beneath that one that they have never questioned. And Job in particular has never questioned until now. It required an encounter with the entire cosmos for this assumption to be revealed. A faulty assumption upon which his ideas of justice lay. And that assumption is this: Job and his friends have assumed all their lives that they have a broad enough perspective to know how God should act. They assume that their perspective is sufficiently broad to know how God is going to act, but it is not. It was before. This was their assumption before. But after this tour of the cosmos, Job now understands that this deeper assumption is something that he's always held and not ever really noticed before, that his perspective was broad enough to know how God should act. The tour of the cosmos cracked him open and revealed the falseness of that assumption. Job no longer thinks that he's got a sufficient perspective to know how God should act. Job has come face to face with his own limits. His own limits of understanding, not only of the cosmos, but of God. So after this happens, Job says something remarkable. He says, Before this, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye has seen you. Now my eye has seen you. Job says he saw God, but he didn't see God exactly, right? What he saw was the sky and the sea and the earth and an oddball assortment of creatures, the ostrich, the ox, the vulture, and these two terrible beasts, Leviathan and Behemoth. And then he says, my eye has seen you. I think that's because Job saw these creatures through the eyes of God, as God sees them. So, I'm going to wrap this up now. We're getting close to time to wrap it up. He has come face to face with his limits, and he repents in dust and ashes. It works. The cosmic tour works. Humbles Job, helps him see himself clearly in the cosmos, and helps him see the cosmos itself more clearly too. And I should say this before I finish up, that these animals don't sound really cosmic to us, right? Mountain goats and vultures and ostriches, we see these animals in the petting zoo. But at the time this was written, these animals were truly cosmic. They lived on the outer fringes of Job's consciousness. They were just little sort of specks out beyond the horizon of Job's world. But now he sees them face to face as God sees them. So it is a truly cosmic tour. If Job were written today, we'd probably, get 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution. Stars being born and dying, and the sun forming out of a cloud of gas and dust 4.5 billion years ago, and life evolving over time. We would get all of that if Job were written today. But Job returns to his house, or to civilization. Oh, and I should say this too, before I do the denouement, the wrap up here. At the end, God tells Job that he has spoken rightly and his friends have not. His friends who were spouting the traditional wisdom, if A, then A, insisting that that's how God worked, because that's what they learned about how God works. They were defending their ideas of God, not God. God doesn't need a defense. But his friends were defending their own conception of God. And in the end, God said, your friends have spoken wrongly, and you, Job, have spoken rightly. Even though Job was angry with God, even though Job went up to the cliff of blasphemy, didn't quite jump over, but got close. Even though Job was white hot angry at God, in the end, God said to Job, you have spoken rightly. After this is all said and done, like I said, Job goes back to civilization, and his fortunes are restored twofold. Where before he had 7,000 sheep, now he's got 14,000. Where before he had 3,000 camels, now he's got 6,000. Where before he had 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys, now he's got 1,000 of each. He gets back twice what he had before. And he gets 10 more children. 7 sons, 3 daughters. Same ratio that he had before. But don't think for a minute, my friends, that this is a reward. If the loss of Job's wealth and children was not a punishment before, then I can assure you this is not a reward at the end. suppose God just chose to bless Job. I don't know. But it's not a reward. After all, think about it. Children are not money. They're not replaceable. He lost 10 children with names. He lost them. 10 new children don't compensate for that. It's not money. It's interesting too, near the very end of the book, Job's 3 daughters are given names. The sons aren't named, but the daughters are. Pretty interesting. Finally, we learned that Job gives his daughters a full share of the inheritance. It's kind of like Job is a little bit looser now, a little bit less worried about doing the right thing in the sense of propriety. He's more interested in acting out of humility and out of a sense of his place in the cosmos, generously, because he sees himself and knows himself now. So he actually gives an inheritance to his 3 daughters, which was actually, back in Deuteronomy, declared to be unlawful. So he actually breaks the law in order to give his daughters their inheritance. It's a little radical, a little bit of a radical move there on Job's part. Sort of a sign that there's been a radical change inside of Job. That's all I have for you, friends. It's been a lovely journey. I'll be around the church. I'll be seeing you, but I won't be doing these videos anymore. And I will miss serving you as your pastor for adult education, but I won't miss you because I'll still be seeing you. I love you all. Thanks for watching.